Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5, Episode 5. It's called Last Night of a Jockey. So, spoilers for the episode as always. This is an episode set all in one room with one actor on his own doing kind of a second character in the sense that he's doing like a voice that's in his own head. But typically speaking, it's one character. It's a one character story. Is this jockey who has been suspended from horse racing because he's been accused of doping the horses and cheating and fixing races and that kind of thing. So it's very much about a character who's down at his lowest moment. He's very insecure about his height. That's the main thing we learn as he's talking on the phone to people. There's a lot of phone calls in this episode. You never hear the other person on the phone, but there's a lot of times where he phones someone and is asking for help. But the basic gist of the story is that quite early on, he hears another person talking, and it turns out to be another version of himself who is in his head and is taunting him for all of his insecurities. The fact that he's short. I think before the voice appears for the first time, he looks at himself in the mirror and calls himself a runt and a shrimp and gets very self-demeaning and all this stuff, and that's kind of where the episode goes with it. It's kind of a mixed bag of an episode. I kind of appreciate the attempt. I like what the episode's trying to do, which is do this one-person story that's really delving in to what makes him tick. I appreciate some of the details that are here. For example, at one point, and this goes along with his insecurities of being short, and that he, perhaps in the past, has cheated to win because he feels insecure about being a loser because he's felt that way about his height his whole life. Actually, I'm kind of skipping over another big part of the episode here, which is that he makes a wish. The voice says he can have a wish, and he says he wants to be big. So he wakes up after a nap, and he's much bigger, right? He's like 7-8 foot tall or something like that. And there's like a slightly miniature version of the set to make him look bigger. Once he's big, and he's feeling quite cocky about it, he phones this woman that's dumped him in the past, and tries to tell her that he's big. But that's what he does immediately. He immediately calls someone who has belittled him. He points out that she used to tap him on the head in a kind of condescending manner. So he's not reaching out to someone that he genuinely cares for. He's reaching out to someone who's made him feel bad about his height before because he wants to say, hey, I'm big now. How he's going to explain how he's big is anyone's guess at this point. But that's the thing. Which actually, so bringing in this whole he becomes bigger part of the plot, which is the real Twilight Zone part. Obviously, he's talking to himself, but you can just say he's crazy with that. You don't have to necessarily explain that with science fiction. But the thing that does make it more Twilight Zone is the wish. It's that, hey, what do you want? And he says, I want to be big. And he wakes up and he's much bigger. I think part of the reason why this episode is less effective than it should be is that this effect isn't good enough. And when I say the effect, I don't mean there's a visual effect that doesn't look good, right? At least not in the traditional sense when we're talking about VFX. All they've done is built the same set, but slightly smaller, with everything in it being slightly smaller so he looks bigger. I think the problem is that, to be honest, other than the bed, it doesn't actually stick out that much. He doesn't... Like, I got from his performance that he was looking at everything and they were smaller. And there's a couple of key props, like he picks up the phone at one point and it's clearly much smaller. But I think this is a case of maybe the direction failed this here, where maybe if in the first part of the episode, the first half, because it's after the ad break he wakes up and he's bigger. If in the first half the direction really pointed out with some specific camera shots where it really emphasized how big something was compared to him. Like, say, maybe you have a low-angle shot when he's standing next to the table or something to show you how big the table is compared to him. And then you could do the same shot after he's big again, and it would stick out just how much of a difference it is. But when he wakes up and he's acting all big, I genuinely didn't remember how big anything was prior to notice the difference. And in the bigger objects, things like the tables, the chairs... It's more pronounced at the end, because the end of the episode he gets bigger again and he's like 10 foot, 11 foot tall. And at that point he's comically large and everything looks tiny. And it's like, okay, this effect works here. I can see what they're doing here. Is it convincing? I don't know. It's a little bit like the the big monster fights in kaiju movies, and I like these movies, but like it doesn't necessarily look convincing like a real city. It looks like a guy in a suit and then a miniature city being stomped on. You know, it doesn't look convincing. And I'm not saying it has to for the effect to work, or for the story to work, but I think it stuck out to me here because it was such a simple trick they were trying to do, which is just make everything else a bit smaller so he looks bigger. But it never quite rang true, and all I could really see was the actor trying really hard to sell it to me, to really convince me that he felt like he was bigger. And I think that's one of the problems. The other problem with the episode is probably just I think the first half relies a little bit on him just arguing with this inner voice a bit too much. Obviously, once you get to the second half and he's gotten larger, and there's like fallout from that, him being larger and things that he tries to do, there's more payoffs to things. The first half is a little bit repetitive because it is just kind of him being upset about his current status quo, that he's not going to be able to race again. He's trying to convince this nagging voice in his head that he isn't a loser, that he can, you know, call for help, and he does call someone for help, and the person basically hangs up on them, and that's a plot point. But I was feeling that the first half was a little bit just samey over and over, and then yeah, some things got more interesting in the second half, but albeit with the caveat that the visual trick they were trying to pull wasn't really working for me. It just kind of felt like an actor in a goofy set trying to make it look convincing. But I do appreciate the intent of the episode. I appreciate that this is kind of about his insecurities. I appreciate that it gives us enough of the character to understand that this is something he's always felt. He's always had a problem with this. He's always felt like he has to prove himself because he's smaller, because he isn't a tall man. The episode gets into this idea of no, like being big isn't a physical thing. You were big when you won a race without cheating. That's when you were big. That's when you were a giant. And the sort of the cruel comeuppance ending, if you want to call that, maybe it's more of a be careful what you wish for ending, where he gets a call from the horse racing like committee or whoever is deciding these things, and they say that there's a petition and you're going to be racing again. You aren't, you know, banned for life. You're going to be a jockey again. And he's delighted. He's happy. He's like almost crying of happiness. He's over the moon at this news. And then the inner voice starts laughing. I suppose this is where you say that this can't be just a voice in his head anymore, because I think it's easy to read it as it's just his insecure subconscious mocking him the whole time. But the fact that it starts laughing at the end, and he's like, why are you laughing? And then he realizes that he's gotten big again, and that now he can't race anymore. He's been told he can go and do horse racing, but he's too big now. And he starts like getting really upset. He pulls out his clothes, and his clothes are tiny, and they won't fit him. No horse on the planet will be able to hold his weight. He breaks down, and it's very much he wished to be big, and the voice even mocks him for that before this phone call happens. It mocks him for, you had a wish to get anything you wanted. Now, the caveat here, of course, is that he didn't realize that it would be granted. He thought it was just a hypothetical question, but he wished to be big, and that's all he asked for. He didn't ask for riches. He didn't ask for great success. He didn't ask for anything else. All he asked for was to be big. And I do actually like that detail, because again, it speaks to the insecurities that he has. It speaks to, this is the first thing he went to, because this is the thing that he's wanted his whole life. And that's, I think there is some meat to that under the surface of the episode. But it's maybe just not as exciting, or maybe exciting is not the right word, because it's not a story that by its nature should be exciting per se, but more engaging is maybe a better way to phrase it, particularly in the first half, where it feels like it's just this kind of angry drunk man yelling around the room before things really get going. Don't get me wrong, there's some important character stuff that's brought up in that first half, but it probably didn't need to be the entire first half of the episode to set up everything it needed to for all the payoffs that come in the second half. And then you add on to that the main gimmick being this, he's really big and the room feels really small. Well, I understand to an extent why this is a one-man show, right? Partly because maybe you didn't know at the time, maybe the techniques to make him look big versus someone else. But let's face it, the best thing to show someone next to for scale, to show how big or small they are, if you're telling a story about that, is another person. It's another regular sized person sells how big or small someone else is. And we just don't have that here. And maybe it's because they couldn't do it, either because the technique wasn't around yet, or because they didn't have the money to do it, or because whatever the reason might have been, or maybe it was just this artistic intent of, no, this is a one-man show, and we just have this set that we have to build 3 times: the regular size, the slightly smaller, and the really smaller one, so that he looks bigger each time. It's not as effective as it feels like it should be, and ultimately the things he's holding just feel like props. Like, for example, when he first gets bigger, he picks up what I think is supposed to be a wine bottle or like a bottle of champagne, but it just looks like a bottle of beer in his hand, and that's probably what they've done, is they've probably just put a different label on a smaller bottle, but it's meant to be a bigger bottle, but it's not that convincing because it just looks like he's holding a bottle of beer. So the effect it's just nullified by what you're actually seeing for most of the time it's happening. Which is a shame, because I do think there is a decent enough character story in there. There's been 1 or 2 stories like this in Twilight Zone before, where it's like one person in a hotel room or something, and they've been kind of mediocre episodes by and large. I think this one, has a stronger character study element at the core of it, but I don't think it's quite enough to really raise it into really good territory, never mind great or like exceptional Twilight Zone. So it's a shame, but I think the performance is fine. Mickey Rooney, to Rod Serling was very excited to tell us about last time that he was going to be on this episode. I do think he's good in the role. I think his performance, especially when he is talking to someone on the phone or when he is making these dramatic monologues, it just feels a little bit like it is a monologue episode as opposed to like, you know, I'm sort of like noticing that it is just this actor who's pretty good, but he's just been giving monologues to do, and it's almost like something he's making just for his show reel so he can show how good he is, as opposed to the story and the writing actually really creating the ups and downs and the conclusion that you want from it. That's my thoughts on Last Night of a Jockey. Next time on the Twilight Zone, we've got an episode called Living Doll, which seems like it's a biggie, and I think I don't know how long they've had this on IMDb, but I've been noticing that when you look at a TV show on IMDb, there'll be a few episodes per season that have got a little label on them saying top rated. And I think it's like the top rated episodes of an entire show will be flagged as like, these are the ones that at least the community as they voted have rated the highest. And this one has that yellow banner. Obviously, Flight at 20 or Nightmare at 20,000 Feet had that as well. I went back to previous seasons, and the obvious ones have it. You know, To Serve Man, It's a Good Life, so on, so on. Like the ones you would expect have it. Season 4 didn't have any, which there is 1 or 2 I quite like from season 4, but I get it. Like in the grand scheme of the whole show, I get it. But yeah, so we're going to get a creepy doll episode. Probably the very thing that inspired stuff like Annabelle, I imagine. So we'll see how this goes. It's highly rated, as I mentioned, so I'm hoping for good stuff. Telly Savalas is in this next one, who I recognize from something. What's he known for? I know his face. Oh, he's Kojak. I've never seen Kojak, but Capricorn 1, I think I've seen that. So he's been in movies of the era, 60s, 70s and stuff. But apparently he's most known for Kojak. I imagine he is the titular Kojak. That's my guess. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I will see you next week for the next Twilight Zone. Let me know what you thought of this one, and of course you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep it coming. And that about does it. So thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.